This is Breaking News UK, broadcasting directly from a terrifying reality where the state has officially declared war on free speech. We are witnessing a catastrophic leadership crisis UK, driven by a government failure so profound that the establishment is now threatening to completely shut down the internet. Amidst a relentless migrant violence surge and the endless influx of illegal immigrants, London and other cities are forced to absorb. A historic Britain crisis has pushed the nation to the absolute brink. Anyone following UK politics or Britain news knows that this national unrest is boiling over into sheer fury. The latest London news confirms that outmatched units are being deployed not to stop violent criminals, but to hunt down ordinary citizens, validating the urgent warnings issued by Reform UK. If you want the terrifying truth about British politics and UK news today, you must look at the authoritarian censorship tearing this country apart. Welcome to the grim reality of News UK. Just hours ago, the political establishment crossed an absolute, unforgivable red line. Terrified by a furious public that refuses to be silenced, the Prime Minister explicitly threatened to block major social media platforms, including X, across the entire country. The government is rapidly weaponising the Online Safety Act, transforming the nation into a terrifying Orwellian dystopia.
Violent anti-immigration protests erupt across the country. A year later, and Britain is again grappling with a wave of similar fury.
Where dissenting opinions are treated as severe acts of domestic terror. Over 280,000 citizens mobilised across multiple cities today, laying an absolute siege to the commercial districts. They are demanding the immediate repeal of these draconian digital laws. The working class has realised that the state is not trying to protect them from harmful information. The state is desperately trying to protect itself from the undeniable truth of its own catastrophic open border policies. The sheer hypocrisy of this authoritarian crackdown is mathematically staggering. The justice system has been completely inverted. In recent weeks, the government has aggressively tracked down and locked away hundreds of native British citizens, handing them devastating prison sentences of up to 3 years simply for posting angry tweets or expressing raw emotion online. Yet, while patriotic workers are fired and grieving mothers are dragged from their homes by regime enforcers, emergency dispatchers are completely overwhelmed by a historic wave of actual physical bloodshed. Authorities officially record a staggering 50,000 knife and sharp instrument crimes every single year. But the outmatched units are explicitly instructed to ignore the violent gangs and the organised looting crews, and instead focus their heavily armoured resources on policing the digital town square. This terrifying two-tier justice system is operating against the backdrop of a total institutional collapse. The national prisons are officially operating at 99% capacity. They are completely full to the bursting point. Because the establishment refuses to halt the daily waves of illegal arrivals, and because they are obsessed with filling cells with online dissenters, they have initiated the deeply controversial early release scheme. The state is actively emptying the prisons, releasing dangerous, violent offenders back onto the streets after they have served barely 40% of their sentences. They are literally freeing actual predators into the public square, just to make room for working-class taxpayers who dared to criticise the government on the internet. This is exactly why the establishment is absolutely panicked. They cannot control the narrative anymore. Elon Musk, the owner of X, has publicly called out this terrifying two-tier policing, warning the global community that the United Kingdom is rapidly descending into a tyrannical police state. In response, the embarrassed and cornered political elite are threatening a total digital blackout. But the massive uprising of 450,000 furious patriots across the country tonight proves that threatening censorship only acts as an accelerant. You can easily delete a dissenting post. But you can never scrub the reality of 50,000 knife crimes from the public consciousness. The citizens are fiercely pushing back because they understand that when a government forces you to fund the phantom population through relentless asset stripping and then threatens you with a 3-year prison sentence for complaining about it, the social contract is completely dead. To truly understand the absolute panic driving the government to threaten a total blockade of social media, you must look past the empty rhetoric about online safety and examine the brutal financial betrayal they are desperately trying to hide. Why is the establishment so terrified of the internet? Because platforms like X have become the last remaining spaces where the working class can expose the relentless state theft destroying their country. The political elite have tethered their survival to an aggressively funded, open-border globalist project, and they know that the truth is mathematically impossible to defend. The national unrest we are witnessing is a direct rebellion against a system that forces the public to finance their own Orwellian nightmare. Every single day, the administration quietly funnels a staggering £8 million of taxpayer wealth into commercial three-star hotels to house the phantom population. Endless waves of undocumented individuals who bypassed every legal entry requirement are immediately rewarded with warm beds, catered meals, and weekly financial stipends. Meanwhile, the native taxpayers who actually fund the nation are subjected to ruthless asset stripping. Vulnerable British pensioners are left to freeze in their own living rooms, aggressively stripped of their winter fuel allowances to supposedly balance a massive national deficit created entirely by the government. Generational rural farmers face crushing taxes that bankrupt family estates overnight. The establishment is terrified because independent platforms allow the public to broadcast the undeniable contrast between the luxury afforded to illegal arrivals and the absolute ruin inflicted upon the native working class. If you are sick of the mainstream media lying to your face and covering up the true financial cost of this authoritarian censorship, subscribe to the channel right now. We are the only ones exposing the absolute ruin of the British public, so hit that subscribe button and help us fight back. This staggering wealth confiscation scheme requires total, unquestioning submission from the native population. Because the government cannot convince the public to voluntarily accept this managed decline, they have weaponized the justice system to force compliance. The administration is forcing everyday British taxpayers to fund a massive multi-million-pound digital censorship machine directed entirely against themselves. They are quietly pushing a dystopian digital identification rollout, a surveillance apparatus that will cost the public billions of pounds to implement, solely to track, monitor and control domestic dissent. Rather than deploying critical resources to tackle the 50,000 knife crimes tearing through the cities, the state aggressively redirects the outmatched units to monitor online forums. They are paying the regime enforcers, using your stolen tax pounds, to hunt down ordinary citizens who dare to complain about the collapse of their neighbourhoods. The hypocrisy of the early release scheme perfectly illustrates this terrifying two-tier reality. The government arrogantly claims there is absolutely no money and no space left to keep violent criminals off the streets. They are actively emptying the national prisons, releasing dangerous predators into the community after they have served barely 40% of their sentences. Yet, the establishment magically finds limitless funding and empty cells when it comes to prosecuting a grieving mother or a military veteran for an angry tweet. The state will release a violent offender early to save money, but they will happily spend vast sums of taxpayer capital to lock up a working-class citizen for 3 years just to protect their fragile political narrative. This is exactly why the Prime Minister is desperately threatening to ban major social media networks. The entire bureaucratic machine is designed to hide the fact that they have completely surrendered the physical streets to violent gangs. They aggressively prosecute native citizens for offensive words because they are utterly terrified of confronting the heavily armed networks responsible for the 200,000 sexual assaults quietly logged by police every single year. When law enforcement fears the very suspects they are supposed to apprehend and instead targets the taxpayers who pay their salaries, the country completely ceases to function as a sovereign state. The fierce uprising currently paralysing the commercial districts is the direct consequence of this ultimate betrayal. The British people are being economically squeezed to the absolute limit, forced to watch their communities crumble under the weight of imported crime, and then told they will be thrown in a cell if they dare to type the wrong words online. The elite panic spreading through Westminster is fueled by the realisation that their authoritarian grip is rapidly slipping. They sparked this inferno by prioritising the protection of illegal arrivals over the survival of their own citizens. And no amount of internet censorship can ever hide the catastrophic reality they have created. The terrifying threats to completely block major social media platforms, and the violent deployment of regime enforcers against ordinary citizens tonight are not just temporary political panics. They are the undeniable, chilling, opening volleys of a permanent, unstoppable national reckoning. If the political establishment refuses to abandon its catastrophic assault on free speech and continues to prioritize the protection of the phantom population over the physical and digital survival of its own citizens, the consequences will be entirely irreversible. If you want to know exactly what this country will look like in 5 short years, you do not need to read a dystopian novel. You only need to look at the terrified, cornered leadership trying to shut down the internet tonight. In 5 years, the very concept of basic British liberty will be permanently eradicated. The nation will violently fracture under the absolute weight of a digital and physical dictatorship. The political elite, the senior civil servants, and the wealthy progressive activists who engineered this collapse will retreat into heavily fortified green zones, shielded from the consequences of their open border policies. These exclusive enclaves will be guarded by elite private security, funded entirely by the relentless state theft extracted from the remaining native citizens. For the traditional working class, the reality will be a permanent, inescapable red zone, governed by an authoritarian digital surveillance state. The two-tier system of justice will no longer be an unspoken reality. It will become the formalized, codified law of the land. Because the prisons are already operating at 99% capacity, the government will officially decriminalize violent offences for the protected demographics. The 50,000 violent knife crimes and the 200,000 devastating sexual assaults quietly logged last year will completely vanish from official records, heavily suppressed by the state's sprawling censorship apparatus. The violent networks operating within the illegal arrivals will be completely shielded by terrified senior commanders. Who prioritise community appeasement over the rule of law. Conversely, the national prisons will be utilised exclusively to house political prisoners and native citizens who dare to type the wrong words. The government will dramatically accelerate its campaign of early releases, freeing actual predators onto your streets after serving barely 40% of their sentences, just to make room for working-class fathers and grieving mothers who complain online. If you attempt to organise a peaceful uprising to protect your local streets, or if you refuse to submit to the mandatory digital identification rollout, you will be aggressively hunted by the state. You will face devastating 3-year prison sentences, while the outmatched units, stretched to a terminal breaking point, simply stop responding to physical emergency calls. The sheer economic burden of managing this engineered demographic and digital collapse will utterly destroy the national economy. The £8 million burned every single day on hotel contracts will rapidly multiply, and the state will aggressively expand its campaign of asset stripping to fund the massive digital censorship machine. They will completely wipe out the remaining generational farmers with crushing taxation and plunge millions of vulnerable pensioners into absolute destitution by stripping away their final safety nets. You will be taxed into poverty for the sole privilege of watching your own country be violently occupied and your own voice be completely silenced. But the fierce resistance paralysing the commercial districts tonight proves that the elite have fatally miscalculated the breaking point of the British public. A functioning, stable democracy cannot survive when it openly despises its own foundational demographics and explicitly outlaws the truth. When a government actively targets its own citizens for speaking out, while simultaneously allowing violent crime to go completely unpunished and surrendering the public square to radical mobs, it completely shatters the fundamental social contract. The elite panic spreading through Westminster tonight is entirely justified. They designed the ruin, they executed the state theft. They ignored every single warning sign from the frontline workers and the overwhelmed local constabularies. They arrogantly believed they could endlessly replace the population, manage the decline of the nation, and simply ban any website that exposed their failures. But they will not be able to control the reckoning. You can block a social media platform, but you cannot block the physical reality of a collapsed society. The citizens have absolutely nothing left to lose. The The illusion of equal justice has been completely destroyed, and the storm they engineered has finally arrived to tear down their digital walls. Stay tuned for the next update.